I'll start everyone off here. This is Golden's third oldest remaining public park here. It's Colorado Territory Park, which has the marker right over there. Would tell folks it was created in 1976, and its purpose was to commemorate Colorado Territory and the pioneers of Golden who helped build it, of which the Astor House is a key representative. And that's part and parcel of the whole reason the place was preserved, as an example and representative of this early era that built the state that we now call Colorado. The backyard here originally served several support purposes for the Astor House. You can see one of them right over there now. That's the brick wash house that was built in the early 20th century. Could use a little repointing on the side, but still in decent enough shape. Where the gazebo formerly stood, back there, that's where the Astor House's barn was. The original one, and then in 1869 built a new substantial one that was actually a little bigger than the main building here was back when. Big wooden structure. And so it's possible that there could be foundational remains of the barn and also the cellar over where the wash house is. And possible artifacts within the yard as well. There have been artifacts unearthed here before. There are old maps that will tell us exactly where the structures stood, except for the first barn, but there's a photo that would show that. The iron fencing that one sees encircling the whole yard, that is historic and important, though it is not from the Astor House. It's from Caddy Corner, here across 12th and Arapahoe. Comes from the Masterson House, which that house was moved there as a refugee from the Great Flood in 1896. And then in 1899, the family decided to really spiff it up with this very nice iron fence. Once these were there were a number more of these around town, and you'll see the bases from several of them within the 12th Street Historic District. But this is one of two survivors I know of. This one was crafted in 1899. It was saved when the law office was constructed there in 1967 and was installed here in the 1990s. Now we are inside the front entrance, right at front door, as a patron would enter the hotel in 1867. All of the interior walls that are still standing around here are the 1867 originals, except for one upstairs, which is between 1867 and 1870, which one would see in a few minutes. And venturing into this room, as one goes into the front door, it's a logical place to go straight to the closest place, which would be the parlor. This is the room where you would register in as guests. And this is also a sample room where traveling merchants could come and sell their wares to the public, and the public would just go in the front door there, and so on. That door there, which is the back door, that led out to the stable in the back. So this is where Seth Lake would register folks and then send a servant or himself just go out back and stable the horses of whoever was here. Now the reasons that I know that this well was original here is a very telltale one. This is one of what I call the log studs, which you can see looking at them. They're cut like sliced from the sides of logs. Mm-hmm. This is locally sourced lumber from the pineries of Clear Creek Canyon. That's where they're getting them from then. And these are not going to be around as soon as the railroad arrives in 1870, because then when the railroad arrives, they're just going to be shipping in lumber. Like the Buffalo Rose was recently totally renovated and whatnot. When they took up the 1871 floor from part of the corner building, that one was stamped from, it was fir, not pine, and it was from Oregon. So that gives you an idea. We were already shipping it in from far places as soon as 1871. But prior to that, it's locally sourced, all of it. And so you get these very interesting pieces of wood which you won't see most anything else. In fact, Jefferson County throughout all of it has around a dozen commercial structures this age remaining in it.
How many?
Around a dozen. And of those, maybe half have some semblance of a historic interior left in it. Like others, like, say, well, the Pullman House is a disassembled stack of charred logs. The Bradford House is a stone ruin down at Ken Carroll Ranch. There are others more intact than that. So what you're seeing here is really a rare treat. To see an 1867 interior, something over 150 years old like this, this isn't even meant to be seen. And this is craftsmanship that is really rare around here. Now this wall... well, slightly more recent. Now this wall didn't originally have this board or that, the toe boards that you see there. When I photographed this in 2016, you will not see that there. This is a reinforcement that was put in back then, which appears to have recycled the original lumber. And that's ubiquitous throughout the building's history, which I'll explain in a little bit. But that was a telltale sign of the original frame walls to me, because they did not have toe boards. And now, why would this sort of thing be? Why would Seth Lake have something a little, what should seem a little bit deficient there in terms of that? And folks did also find up at the ceiling level and whatnot there, I don't know if any are really left now, but there are spliced beams supporting the floor and whatnot, which I know from after the fire in the Loveland block, the old Capitol Grills building, which back part was built in 1866, there were sturdy, full-span timbers there. And so why would there not be toe boards? Why would you have end-of-log slices like that? Why would you have spliced beams? And there are two explanations that came to my mind, either or both of which are quite plausible. One is, but to use a modern term, value engineering, which is you're cutting costs. Put the bulk of the money in the stout outer stone envelope of the place, and cut costs with the less important interior partitions, and that can explain some of that. Also, however, Golden was having a huge building boom in 1867, which was really straining the local resources. We know for a fact that Golden had a severe brick shortage and was probably having severe shortages of other building materials as well. So Seth Lake might have been left with some leftovers or piecing together what he could in terms of the wood. The stone you could more easily get, though he had already planned to build it out of stone. There were buildings in Golden that were originally supposed to be made of brick, which they did shift it to stone. Calvary House is one of those, but Astor House is always planned to be built out of stone. But nevertheless, it is special to have these studs, which are actually log ones. It's you don't get to see very many of these at all anywhere, much less have it visible to you.
So where did the stone come from?
The stone came from the west end of 12th Street, the quarry of Charles R. Foreman and Company. And I believe that the Moss House in Goosetown at 518 9th Street was built in 1867 also. I believe it's stone from there. The stone from Calvary House is there. And I believe the stone that's the base of Calvary Church is also from there. And there could be other works around like that as well. Now, for years, there was an oral history which I myself had told of, where folks had thought that the grand staircase of the Astor House came from the South School and was recycled here. But no, it is actually 1867 original for sure. And part of how you know that is you look at it, you see no sign of modification to the staircase whatsoever. Something that's a transplant, especially in an era where everything is more or less custom made, and most especially from a building built in 1873 on an entirely different scale, had much higher ceilings and so on, and by different contractors. A staircase retrofitted in here should have needed to have been modified in some way that would have been noticeable instead of fit in exactly. But there's no sign of that, nor any sign of modification to its opening all above. It appears to be original. And another sign is that it appears to be a craftsmanship design relation to the main staircase in the Dove Inn, actually, which I know to have been built in 1869. They look like, they're not identical, but they look like they were done by the same carpenters. And I believe the ornamental woodwork and whatnot of the Astor House was probably done by the Excelsior Planing Company of Golden. And there's other examples of that around. Now, looking over at the bases of the walls, you can see here that the wall plaster only goes down so far, and then you see it exposed just plain stone where the baseboards were. And this tells you that the ornamental woodwork that was here needed to be the original, because this outer wall plaster didn't come down and cover it. It was already there. But other things that came subsequent, such as a wall here, the plaster is there. So things that are originally here in 1867, the plaster does not cover up. But subsequent things, you see indications that they were there. Now, back in the hallway, one of the reasons I know that this wall here is original is because, according to transcript count, the dining room, which, according to account, had to seat over 100 people, so there's really only one place left in the lower floor for it to go. It was also accessible by only a single doorway, and this is for a couple of reasons. Seth Lake would sit here and guard this doorway, or stand here and guard this doorway. That's to keep the town riffraff from coming in and overrunning his restaurant and get food there and so on. Make it primarily for the guests and whatever townspeople could fit in, and try not to inundate your servers. Seth Lake did do this successfully. That's another story. He got a little overran time and again. But the reason why the wall also has a single opening and is useful for that purpose is traffic control and sound control. Because that keeps, this could hold over 100 people in it. And that's going to be rather noisy. And so that keeps the noise from flooding into the rest of the building and disturbing the guests up above or in the parlor or things like that. And it keeps the traffic cordoned off to that room and not wandering all over the hotel. And so this was Seth Lake's 5th hotel in Colorado. And so by the time he was able to plan this one out, he had things down pretty much to perfection. It's a simple layout, but it's a well thought out one. So now I can venture over here into the dining room. And I'll point out on the other side here, one can see more of the log studs, as I call them, joining the staircase. And several of them had historical sistering on them when the wall was newly exposed. They knew that it was a bit thin for it. Though the sistering that's done down below at the staircase level, that was put in 2016. Reinforcement there. And on the underside of the staircase, this was all 1867 original too. And this what replacement was put in 2016. There was originally a door from the hallway into underneath the staircase. Yeah, this wall originally also did not have a toe board on it, the baseboard that you see there. And that was put in as a reinforcement in 2016. And this wall also has log studs like the one you see up above the door there, which helps point out its antiquity. And there's another back over here, which I didn't even see several years ago, but my pictures sure enough show it. It's right there in the corner of the room, as it was originally. The one next to it also shows an indication, and what's fun about that is the first fire of the Astor House in 1886, that burned off what was the original rear projection, the original kitchen. And so that there is obviously a survivor. It did not, there's always an open question to me whether it burned its way into the main hotel or whatnot, and the answer is not enough to take that out. So it was pretty nice, though you'll see other places where the main part of the hotel was not so lucky later on. Now this wall has been rebuilt a little, by the way. These studs that you're seeing here above the grate, these are definitely appear to be pretty much brand new, because according to my pictures that I took in 2016, there was a large vent opening at the bottom there. And the stud's only so many feet long above it, and those have been replaced, and it extends down to the bottom now. So that's another of the 2016 changes. And obviously, things like the steel beams put in at that time also. Have no steel construction around here back in 1867. Now, a special treat over here. This is the hidden door. This was found behind the wall plaster during the renovations. And the door, complete with hardware, was found behind the wall plaster and whatnot. The door is still around. I'll show it to you ultimately. And where this led to originally was actually a hallway that was alongside the kitchen and back. And this hallway, if you ventured down it, you could go on the right into the kitchen and on the left to the cellar. Probably a root cellar, store things for the kitchen. Now, a real curiosity that was discovered here was the strip along at the lintel level up there. And so you scratch your head about that. You might think something like picture rail, that's the right height for it, but that's awfully massive for something of a picture rail type. You could just nail that into the plaster too, or something like that. Though, look more closely, you do see large chunks of wood embedded in there to the wall and whatnot. Those would be anchors. I believe what was up there was a shelf.
Oh.
Yeah. Probably for use in serving the patrons of the restaurant. The Astor House, during Seth Lake's time, did not have a bar, because he's a devout Baptist. He's not going to have alcohol in his establishment. So Astor House actually competes at a competitive disadvantage because it's probably the one hotel in town that does not have its own bar. And so that's a bit of fun trivia there. But obviously whatever was up there was original. There was no plaster behind it. Now the reason you see this plaster, which is basically like concrete, I believe the reason why that is there, and it's all hand trailed and so on, interesting texture and whatnot, I believe this was applied to the outer stone walls in order to give them a more even surface so that you could put like wallpaper or other things on them. Something to give it an even surface so that you could apply a wall coating that would look nice and not totally rippled or things like that.
Oh, so it was originally smooth.
Yeah.
This is just from age.
Well,
'Cause you couldn't put
originally it's more or less as it is, but they might have then plastered and lathed over it and then put the wallpaper on.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. The rest of the finish inside appears to have been plastered and lathed directly onto the studs. And the markings of that do come in handy to know about later on, but now one can see the ghosted outline here of a wall that was subsequent. It has a counterpart over there, and there were indications, have been indications that the dining room, after it ceased being a dining room, was divided into something like 3 sections, and that there were tenant businesses that operated out of the Astor House. This is during the early 20th century.
What size is this room?
I'm not sure, though the Astor House, as the stone building, is the full 50 feet of its lot. So the main envelope here may be something like 50 by 25 feet, so you subtract off maybe 20 or so feet for the main hallway and the parlor, so that might give you an estimate of the dining room. Yeah, that smaller door, by the way, that's not original. It had some differences from the main entrance there. I think that was cut into the wall at some point there to allow servants to enter, not have to keep going clear over to the main door.
Are these exterior doors original?
No. Now, these were cut into it later on, possibly when it had other businesses or tenants going on here. Window opening there is original. And the windows themselves, these are not the 1867 originals, but these are 1990s replicas of the originals. And these are as the originals were. 6/6 double hung sash. Almost all windows of Golden of this era are like that. And they had a common manufacturer. That's part of why that tends to be the pattern. It's that way since 1859. There are some exceptions, like the old Capitol Grills building has the nice tall fanlit windows, but most are like this. You know, one might notice the floor itself can be a bit of a patchwork. I believe the central part, which I'm standing on, and into the hallway there is original, or at least near original or something like that. The broader, more abused boards and things like that. And the parlors, I think, was replaced somewhere like in the 1890s, possibly by Ida Getz, though it's also replaced over here. And I do know there is the 4th fire from the Astor House's history, which I have yet to run back across the account of, but I know for certain it exists. That is the arson fire, which I believe is from around 1904, and that's when the Astor House was vacant. And robbers broke in to try to loot the place and found absolutely nothing. And so they got mad and just set fire to it. And fortunately, the fire didn't get very far because the fire station is right next door to the east. They notice this flickering coming on from inside instantly and come over, put it out. Though it would have damaged the floor, there had to be something in it to damage. And so I tend to believe there has to be either remnants of the fire damage to the floor or the floor was simply replaced. And so far, any indication I have is wherever it was, the floor simply got replaced, which would be pretty logical. Now, the question was asked earlier, why are the door frames a bit short? And you'll notice going up these stairs, this railing is pretty short too. Well, people are generally shorter back 150 some years ago. So we have much better nutrition now, and we get taller. That's another how you know the age of the staircase.
How was it illuminated back then? Candles or?
There was no electricity until at least 1887 in the building. And so it would be lit by oil lamps. Mm-hmm. Now up here, as one can see, it's been seriously stripped down, but we have here beside us another of the original walls, and yeah, you can really tell the log studs of this one. And they even still bark there and everything. And yeah, the Astor House's original floor plan, I was able to determine based on the evidence once it was stripped down like this. Folks had theorized through time what it would have been originally like, and there are some indications, but never able to quite fully piece it together. But this north-south hall was original, and very logically so. It comes up straight from the downstairs, and you do need a straight access to the balcony here. But this room here, it's original, though it was all originally one room. And the reason you know that is because there is no ghosted outline in the plaster. Mm-hmm. No groove in the plaster of that wall there. However, this wall is what I keep saying is near original. And the reason I say that is because it also has the log studs and whatnot upon it. But this wall was more substantially built. The toe board on this one is original. And the crossboards are also original. They weren't added later. The lath pattern goes straight across all of it. And I believe what probably happened is that this room would have originally been one large room and probably housed like bunks, a mass room for folks. It could have been a penthouse type suite, but it was probably bunks originally. It might have become something more luxuriant later on. And I believe the reason this one, much or considerably littler than the rest, was cordoned off. I think this was where Seth Lake and his wife cordoned off for their living quarters. They did live in the hotel for a time and took care of it. Though part of what also convinced me of this is that if you were the proprietor of the hotel and you were to have a living quarters but still be able to take care of the hotel, this is the perfect vantage point operationally, because from this door you can look straight down to the main door and have quick access to all of the lower floor, yet look straight across to the balcony there and have quick access to all the other hotel rooms and to the garret upstairs. It's like at a perfect point to be at the most strategic distances away from everything. Yeah, the original wall here that joins the north-south hallway, it does have a toe board now, and it did not have that back when I found that in 2016. And the reason I make special note of that is one can see that the lath pattern is vertical on it, and of course that kind of crazy quilt's not possible. And this was a key way to tell original walls apart from others that had been recycled, because these studs here originally were just extended to the floor and were nailed into it. Like I said, an indicator of an original wall. But there were others here that were different. They're not standing here now, but they were here and I photographed them. But first of all, I should show you from this vantage point, how does one figure out what the original layout was? And up here we get one of our neato hints that we got. You see that the rafters are smoked black, but in a confined space going down the center. And that is fire damage, smoke damage from the fire in 1905 or 1908, which burned down from the garret above, is in here. And the patrons of that time were obviously rather thoughtful ones. They just closed off the hotel rooms, and thereby the smoke filled the hall, but did not get too much anywhere else except where the flames directly burned down. And this beam here actually does go along the western, or the southern end of the damage, and one can see where the smoke ends on each one there. The hallway was originally pretty narrow. The Burgess house has an upstairs layout just like it, where it was a central hallway that was flanked on each side by smaller hotel rooms. The Burgess house rooms are a little larger than this, but you can tell the original size and placement of the Astor House rooms because of the grooves left in the plaster from them. And they were basically equal-sized rooms. And one from the main hallway would enter through the door of the east-west hallway and continue down, could go to the rooms on either side, right up to this point. And how one figured out how the hallway ended, it's in part marked by this interesting shape in the floor. It's an angular one. Triangular here, which when one has a look at the pictures that I took, there was a big post that stood right here. Triangular in nature. And you can see the anchor remnant of it right up there. Mm-hmm. The hallway ended in twin doors, set at angles, one open that way, one open that way. And there was a remnant of an original wall that went down the center. The back here was divided into two rooms originally. And what you see here at the west end here, this is definitely fire damage from another of its historical fires. This is the chimney fire of 1899 that took place here. And a little bit of an emergency that school mine students boarding area noticed, but the firefighters kept it confined to the chimney. The chimney had a defective flue, and so they just simply destroyed the chimney and walled it over. And it was waiting to be found these years later. And I did notice it did eat away at the outer stone shell of the building, so I always encourage folks to examine that a little bit. But hey, the thing has stood up for 120 years since then, so I don't I think that kind of speaks for itself, but I'd still be on the lookout for it. But there is never a fireplace there, and the reason that is because the chimney has its eastern counterpart twin that has none. The hotel was originally heated by wood-burning stoves. Now over here, by the way, on the rear wall, you see this cabinet built into the wall. That's where a window was. Exactly right window size and height and everything, in the massive wood lintel. And so yeah, originally the room back here could see out the back. And this was just simply creatively enclosed. Yeah, the Astor House rooms were originally fairly small, except for the one at the east end. But the Astor House originally served all sorts of patrons, from poor miners and their families to territorial legislators and Supreme Court justices. And so Seth Lake Greeley was serving people from across several walks of life. Yeah, the question was asked about this opening here, which was not a stairway. It wasn't at a logical place for one, for starters, but it would have interfered with the ability to access the kitchen for sure. But it is possible that the fire in 1886 ended up compromising the floorboards to the extent that they did need to be replaced, or otherwise this could have needed to be replaced over time. What you see here is essentially plywood. It's modern. Now, speaking of fires, one has already seen evidence of the 1908 fire. That fire started upstairs in what was called the garret, which was essentially an attic space that was livable. And it burned down into the second floor in one of its rooms. It was otherwise confined to the hallway in terms of smoke damage, but over here you'll see a upon the rafters direct flame damage from where it burned down. So that would have caused considerable damage to this part of the hotel. It's not simply smoke damage. You would also have the damage from fighting the fire, so there's going to be water damage and stuff around. And the place, at least in terms of the plaster and lath here, would have been thoroughly trashed by that point. And so from a bit of account, though also from just the sheer physical evidence, what happened in 1908 is Ida Getz took advantage of the opportunity to modify the place. And what she did was convert it to the format most folks are familiar with later. What she did was she took pairs of these little rooms and joined them together into larger rooms. Created a new east-west hallway on the north side, coming from the main hall. Though she didn't just simply join the rooms together, she stripped the walls of their plaster and lath and then dismantled them and built them, as you can see remnants of in the plaster, built them a foot offset or so from their first location. You can see behind you another example of that. These enlarged the rooms a little, and how I knew that the walls had been rebuilt is because the studs were all the same kind that the original walls were, except the lath patterns on them were crazy. You had them on the inside, you had them vertical, you had them horizontal. It's impossible for them to have been that way originally. What Ida did was just simply took all the lumber and rebuilt the walls in the new positions. Yet kept the hallway openings where they were. She just simply infilled them with doors. And if one remembers the way the museum was here, there were doors. You go straight from this door, you go straight through another door. It's in a straight line. I went back and I examined the walls, see if my theory held up anywhere further than that. And sure enough, you see in the openings, the doors are just stuck in there. They aren't even physically connected structurally to the walls adjoining. They were infill where the hall was. And I like to tell folks the original walls of the Astor House never left. They're still here. That's because she recycled everything. The structural lumber, the baseboards, the doors, the door frames, the decorative woodwork, it was all just rearranged. A very economical way to do a big renovation. You would have needed to plaster and lath new, of course, but still. Now, I did think that the staircase up to the garret was original right up until I found the lath marks on the inside here. And nope, the original entrance to the garret might not have been a stairway at all. It could have just been a ladder, like the Brickyard House has. What you need is for someone to be able to get up there and live in it, and that's what we know of the garret. That really is it. Though in 1908 it was modified into some nice living quarters with dormers added not long after. Yeah, also after the fire of 1908, the electrical system, at least as we had known it, was added, and the reason we know it was added then is because you see the knob and tubing mounted directly upon the flame-singed rafters here, so it shows no sign of damage itself. And so we know that the Astor House's power was, at least at that time, this would have been installed by the Golden Illuminating Company. Over here we have some more original wall stuff. It hadn't been trashed. Now there's a collection of the door frames and some of the transoms over. Now the doorways in the adjoining the hall over there, one sees peculiar holes over the doors. I did figure out today from matching up my photos that Yeah, the transoms were just simply taken out and have been stashed over here for now. I don't know why anyone took the transoms out unless it was for temporary structural bracing while they were working on it, which I wouldn't blame them for at all. We're standing in the 1894 edition now. And this is put here as an ultimate replacement for the original kitchen. And the interior walls of this are all original to when it was built. There's no sign of any modification to them or reassembly or anything like that. So unless it was one big open space, I think they're all original. And the flooring appears to be from something like that time. Well, on that side as well. The flooring I'm on here is a bit nicer and is just like that in the parlor.
Why would it have been lower if it's original? Why would they have dropped it?
I don't know what Ida Getz is thinking in that, but there is a drop from the original hotel level to here, isn't it?
Was the kitchen shorter? Was the ceiling height in the kitchen less?
Yeah, she might have wanted a lesser height in the kitchen. We ought to examine that once we're down there again. Yeah. Now up here you do see, looking up into the attic, you see the smoke damage from 1908 also up. I got in here. Place would add you coughing a little bit, though fortunately with a bit of battling they got that fire under control in time. Otherwise it could have been much more disastrous. That's the last of the 4 fires the Astor House has had. Yeah, the question was asked how many rooms the Astor House originally had and how much it subsequently had. The Astor House back in 1867, by its original layout, I believe had 1 large one and 6 small ones. So for a total of 7, not counting the garret, which probably wasn't for guests. That was probably for tenants, since there's no indication guests ever stayed there. The large room was probably bunks, and the others were more private quarters. Now this room here, by the way, that directly accesses off of the hall, this became known as the hall room. For obvious reasons, it accessed the hall, though how I figured that out, though, is there's one fun tale that, and the transcript talks about it, that's where one of the patrons had woke up, he was half asleep, and decides he wants to take a little a sojourn out to the balcony for a nice, cool nighttime constitutional. So he would have gone out, woken from his bed in this room, just take the near door, you're still half asleep, go right out onto here to the existentially challenged balcony at the time, and you can figure the result. You go right down there. Fortunately, the only thing seriously injured was his pride. But they called it the hall room in that article, and there is really no other candidate for it. There is the other room that opens to the hall, yes, but by the time you made it to this doorway, you'd have to navigate around the staircase, and by then you're fairly well awake, and the other rooms adjoin the east-west hall, and so you're probably awake by the time you get out of them as well. And so, but there's one where you can totally be half dozing and end up having fun. So that's gives an idea how one knows what parts of the place were named. Mm-hmm. There's the dining room, the parlor, the hall room, and the garret. Yeah, I was just explaining if one went downstairs, which we can't because it's not lit up, one would basically see a dirt floor and some concrete walls and whatnot. There was a dugout. The staircase may or may not be original to it, but underneath the sidewalk in front there is a little cement space, not really large enough to be a room or whatnot, and that was a coal bin where you'd load in the coal from the top and just get the coal in from the basement. And reason I know that for sure is because the acquaintance block, my family's building, we have one too, and ours is much larger than it, and this one's of identical construction. Last but not least, we venture to the kitchen, and one can see where the counters and whatnot originally were. And this was the successor to the original kitchen. I hadn't noticed that arched opening down there before. That's fun. Yeah, from the basement. And yeah, this is where Ida Getz and folks would cook the meals for guests and whatnot, just like the original kitchen. The original kitchen was a frame structure that was originally the Lake House Hotel that was on the forward part of the site, and that was Seth Lake's hotel number 4 in Colorado, which he just moved the back of the lot, attached it to the stone upgrade that he was building, and it became the kitchen, and ultimately went up in flames, but not too soon. The Lake House, I have since seen one photo of it where you see part of it in good detail. It was a Carpenter Gothic style, interesting looking hotel. Yeah, Seth Lake's first hotels in Colorado would have been, I believe, the Buckeye Hotel at Apex, which burned down in 1863. And I believe the Bachman Stone House stands right where it stood. It itself is an 1864 hotel, the Apex Inn. The Green Mountain House, which stood in the area where Colorado Mills is. And it's gone also. The 2 Mile House up in Golden Gate Canyon, that's where Seth Lake advertised being a justice of the peace. He could do his own weddings. Though, interestingly enough, the Astor House itself has had 4 weddings, and Seth Lake did not officiate at any of them, though he would have been a witness to one. And then the Lake House, which was on this site until he moved it to the back and upgraded it with the Astor. Now, Ida Getz did a fun modification of her own. She added the more restroom-type facilities on the ground floor. Though the key fixture is not here at this time. That was her bathtub. And it's one of the first true publicly available ones in the town, and sought-after treat. So it's historically important, too. So, yeah, thanks, everyone, for having a nice look-see through the place.